All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Jerry Gilmer. It's June 22nd, 2022. We're at Jerry's home in McMinnville. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jerry. You mentioned you kind of had some background. Why don't you just start with some background about yourself?
I'm a native Oregonian. Born here in 1940. I was raised in Canby. Spent 20 years in Canby, 20 years in Forest Grove, 10 years in Bend, and the rest of the time here has been in McMinnville. I was a technician for the Oregon Army National Guard for 24 years. I started out as a heavy mobile equipment mechanic, and later on I was transferred in 1966. I cross-trained into electronics, mostly radar systems and that sort of thing. So that's my personal background. I think that's pretty much it. I think I just hit the highlights here.
I like it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned kind of you were in Canby, you were in Forest Grove. What took you from place to place in your early days?
Well, working for the Oregon Army National Guard, they had what they call organizational maintenance shops, and they positioned them all throughout Oregon, and nobody wanted Forest Grove. And I had only been on the job a year, and I put in for it, and they give it to me. And I went out to a building that they built. Didn't even have an air compressor in it or any of the things that I would need to complete my mission there. But I spent 20 years there, and 25 years in the National Guard itself. And I was not only a member, but I was a federal technician.
So give me an idea of some of the types of projects you'd work on for the National Guard.
Maintaining their equipment, all different types of equipment, from anywhere from lanterns that they use out when they're on bivouac or out in the vehicles, that sort of thing. One side note, with the National Guard, you have not only the military mission, but you have a mission for the state. We were deployed in 1964 to Sheridan, had a tremendous flood. Those types of things. Spent 20 years there, then 20 years in Canby on a farm. I was raised on a dairy farm. And then 20 years in Forest Grove as a technician. And then in 1980, my mother lived in Bend, Oregon, or a place called Tumalo on the outskirts. And she didn't drive, didn't anything, so I decided they had a maintenance shop in Redmond, Oregon. So I transferred there for 5.5 years, taking care of what they call an armored outfit. It had tanks and personnel carriers and all the stuff you've seen lately on the news media with Ukraine. I got out of the Guard in was 1985, and stayed there for 4 years. Worked for Beaver Coaches in their electronics and wiring department. Then I moved down here in 1990, and to start the wine portion of the interview, this is how it went. There was a priest and business manager for the Trappist Abbey. His name was Pascal Phillips. He was a brilliant man. My wife at that time was friends with him. She did his secretarial work, and we become close friends. And one time he come by while I was in Bend, and he said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "About ready to get let out of a job." He said, "I'm on my way to Idaho. When I get back," he says, "send me a resume." He says, "Would you go back to the Valley?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "You send me your resume," and he says, "I'll find you something." Well, I didn't hear from him. That was at Thanksgiving, so I didn't hear anything from him for about a year. In a year, he called me up and he says, "Jerry, yeah? How would you like to go to work for the Abbey?" And I says, "Well, sure." "Well, you come down here and you live out of your suitcase, and I'll give you $500, and we'll start the 1st of January. I said, "Okay." And I said, "Pascal, can I ask you a question?" He says, "Yeah." I said, what am I going to be doing?" He says, "Well, there's a lot of vineyards going in and a lot of wineries." And he said, "We have a 20,000 square foot old warehouse that we used to build church pews in." And he said, "The church pew business is gone." And he said, "There's going to have wine, place to store wine." And he says, I think it would work here for us And he said, but the only thing that we have that won't work is the fact that I can't supply monks to run it. He says, I have to run it with a secular. All my monks are 65 years or older. And so I went down there and showed up, and we started in. Now, this old warehouse had about 7 big, huge rooms, places where they used to glue church pews together, that sort of thing. And so his mental picture was that I would receive some wine. He wanted to have 3 major wineries is all he wanted. And that he would, I would put that wine away, keep an inventory on it, answer the telephone, operate a lift truck, and possibly, excuse me, that would be pretty much what his mental picture was. Pascal was so brilliant, he was a runaway. After the first year, we had 25 wineries, 7 full-time employees, 3 lift trucks, and a pickup delivery truck, a box truck to go out and pick up wine and bring it in. And I was not involved in any of the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, because it is alcohol, so it has to be according to the federal rules. So he did all of that. There was a situation with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Now, one of the things is he got the truck, he got the lift trucks and all that stuff. When he, I'm going to sort of jump around here a little bit. How do I put this? He figured to help bring in business, he would purchase a labeling machine so you could label wine for the wineries. That way it would entice them to bring it in. They could bring it in bond, unlabeled, and wine cannot be sold on the market or can't have the tax paid till it's labeled. So he bought this labeling machine and come from Italy, and it was quite a endeavor to. My electronics background and stuff sort of kicked in there to help keep the thing functioning. One of the things we found out that once that wine is labeled and stuff, if you want to sell it on the market, you just can't ship it out of the warehouse. Because of alcohol and tobacco rules, it has to be physically taken back to the winery on the winery premises where the tax can be paid. Then it comes back to the warehouse and can be distributed or distributed out of the winery. He went to Washington, D.C. and circumvented all the alcohol, tobacco, small sub-businesses. And went back there and he talked to him. He says, here, I'm a poor little monk out here in this monastery. And he says, I have a small business. And he says, we started. And he says, the charades that you people come up with are something else. We're spending all this fuel and all this manpower and stuff to move wine from our warehouse back to the winery and then back again just to satisfy your rules. And he says, I find it ridiculous. The head of the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms told him, Mr. Pascal, or Father Pascal, he says, you go back home and write me a letter and to the effect of it. So he did. He got a variance from the federal government. That variance worked really well for about 12 years. And then for some reason we got an audit and they pulled it out from under us and said, no, you got to go back to doing it according to the rules. You know, federal bureaucracy is what it was. So anyway, that's sort of the rundown. That's how it started. And I figured I could count beans and bullets. For the guard, I could sure heck count wine bottles. Okay.
So you mentioned that the space had been designed originally for church pews.
Yes.
And so what gave the idea of turning it into wine storage? Where did he get that idea?
He's just brilliant. He just probably popped into his mind. And he'd been talking to Susan Blosser from Soulful Blosser. He talked to Roland Souls at Argyle. He went to the couple of the big ones and said, I'm going to start this. Do you think it'll work? And they said, well, heavens, yes. So that's how it sort of started. But again, it took took off and just went wild. And of course, everybody knows here presently today we have over 1,000 vineyards and over 600 wineries in Oregon. Now, as I was building the business, I finally got me a secretary to answer the phone and do the bill of ladings and stuff. But I spent a lot of time out meeting people at the wineries, meeting the owners, meeting the winemakers. I was clear down into Ashland, Medford, Grants Pass, Cottage Grove, Roseburg, just touching bases. And I met some wonderful people during that time. There was 2 classes of people in the wine industry. There's the hard-working farmer that's growing the grapes, producing wine, and all the things that go with it. Then there's the doctor or the attorney that has this beautiful vineyard with his floor, with a deck overlooking his residence, and so he's the money person, and he hires the rest of the people to do it. It's pretty much that way. A little side note, it costs $3 to make a bottle of wine. That's the label, the cap, the cork, the glass, and the so forth. And just a little side note there.
It's something that's come up a lot lately with all of the supply costs and shortages. And no one ever really considers how much it costs to make a single bottle of wine. So it's interesting to have that in the record. So I'm curious, for you, did you have any background with wine, any knowledge of wine, any appreciation for wine before you started?
I made homemade wine.
So you were a winemaker.
Yeah. Theoretically, and I went by the federal rules as a civilian or as a person that wants to make wine out here. You can go to Alcohol and Tobacco Arms or write them a letter, and you can make up to 300 gallons for personal use. You can't sell it, you can't do anything, but you can invite your friends in and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I made some berry wines. I made a black cap that was, I must have bottled it too soon because it was effervescent like champagne, and it felt just like, you ever had pop rocks? It's just like you grabbed a handful of black caps and popped them in your mouth. They were just wonderful. Very low in alcohol, but it was sure good in flavor. That's my background in winemaking.
So what did you have to learn? What were the biggest lessons as for wine specifically, or just running a business of that sort in the kind of early years?
Coming up with inventory system was one of the biggest things, because you have to keep track down to the bottle, and then you have to turn in reports of how much gallonage that comes into the warehouse. That was one of the big hurdles, was keeping track of it. I got involved in building a custom-built Microsoft inventory warehouse system. And one thing I learned with computers, when you build a program, you're never done with it. You're continuously upgrading it. We used that for about 10 years, and it just become a not only costly, but a nightmare. Mm-hmm. So we bought a CAN program out of California, out of Napa Valley, that not only took care of warehousing, but it took care of all the wineries that had to do their chemical testing and all that stuff. It was a whole huge program. It was a little bit of a learning curve to learn how to operate it, but that was one of the big things. The other thing was, of course, when you have a warehouse, you usually have to load loading docks. You have to have a service set up, so the wineries are small. They'll come up in their car and pick up 10 cases. So you have to have that kind of facility and people to load them and unload them and help them. The other thing that I never thought about that I got involved in is transportation. The hub comes out of California that goes all over throughout the United States. It's Napa Valley. There's tremendous wine warehouses down there. Well, we travel from here. We take the wine to California, and from there it goes out to the distributors. So I had to put trucking in place. I didn't want to buy my own trucks. I didn't want to get drivers and mess with that sort of thing. So I went on the hunt, and I found a man up in Seattle, Washington, or excuse me, Tacoma. Ray Gutner was his name, and he had a 5 trucks, 18-wheelers with refrigeration, and it was called Burgundy Express. He would pick up loads in Seattle. He picked up loads in Walla Walla because Walla Walla was starting to develop up in the wine industry there. He would come by our doors, pick up the loads that we have. We would have up to 20 or 30 different small, from anywhere from 20 cases to a distributor in St. Louis to somebody in New York. And so he would haul those to California and drop those at various warehouses where the distributors want them dropped so they could, the trucking could go from there, refrigerated, to wherever its end of destination. That worked out really well, and I had his use of his facilities for quite a long time. It was pretty nice.
What was your impression of the? Well, we'll talk about it. We'll start bigger, I guess. What was your impression of the industry that you were working with? What was your impression of the people in Oregon wine at that point, and of sort of the wine quality and demand at that point?
My impression was it was a growing industry. When I started, there was only like 20 or 25 wineries, and just in the first year, it leaped to 100. But my impression was I found that they were very friendly. Oregon wineries worked among themselves back and forth. There was no us or them. Later on, there was a couple of huge purchases of wine, one down to called King Estates. They tried to buy all the Pinot Gris in the country, and that sort of the rumors started rattling through the industry. But they would work with each other. I mean, the Oregon wineries here, if this person needed glass or this person needed certain things or help, they were very, very cordial and very. Of course, there was an International Pinot Noir celebration here that Susan Blosser started here at Linfield. There was lots of seminars that I attended, which a lot of the wineries were there, went there, and you'd meet people that way. But my overall impression was it was just a family. It was a family business throughout the whole state of Oregon. And they had even reached over into Washington State too.
So obviously your part of the industry is not something that's terribly exciting or thrilling for people to think about. It's kind of a necessary thing, but it's not something people are going to think about as they're getting into the business necessarily. So were they prepared for sort of the need you were fulfilling? Were they ready for?
That came as a secondary.
Yeah.
As they go out, they were marketing. Now, excuse me, a lot of the wineries would actually send a salesperson that was working for them out to these different distributors. And Oregon wines, and I think you could really contribute to Susan Blosser for that. She was great in promoting Oregon wines, and Oregon wines are right up there with French wines. The temperature, the climate, everything is pretty much parallel. And so some of the wines that these smaller wineries making were just fantastic as far as quality. And of course, there was always some that you always think there might be a shakeout because we started to build so many of them. But anyway, that's pretty much in a nutshell. That the wineries themselves would do the distributing or get contacted by distributors, and then they say, well, how do we get it there? Because some of the distributors wanted the wineries to pay for all the shipping up to that point, and of course added on to the bottle of wine, and so that's how it worked. And of course then they found out there's this little Trappist monastery out here, and there was a mystique about being a Trappist abbey with 87 monks to start with. There was a lot of parts of the business that I can cover a little later as far as that made things work pretty smooth. But they would see that we could provide the services that they needed, and we grew as it goes. If something would crop up, then I would address the issue and go for it. Try to really back the industry, because we're a service industry, and if you don't do good service, they don't do business with you.
You mentioned the kind of the sudden success that was perhaps unexpected. What were the kind of first biggest adjustments you had to make as the business was taking off so quickly?
The shipping to California with Burgundy Express, the inventory system that I had to come up with, because I had to of course, bend to certain federal rules. That was a big one. And then there's temperature control issues in any kind of warehouse. And this old church pew factory was not insulated. The monks had it insulated. We installed air conditioning. We try to keep wine pretty much at 50 degrees or thereabouts. It's better to keep it steady temperature than it is the actual temperature itself. You could keep it at 60, it's fine. So, but those were the issues. Now, in the growth, after the first year and a half, we were just bulging. We had 150,000 cases for about 25 wineries. I went to Pascal and I said, Pascal, if you want to stay in the business or grow it, we need another building. So I sat on the monastery financial council. I had to give presentations, so I went in and made a presentation. Pascal says, you figure out what you need. I figured out what I need for square footage, and I tripled it. I filled that in 4 years. Went over 100 and some wineries then. And 275,000 cases. They built it into the mountainside on the back side of the present warehouse that's there. And I designed a system where it was temperature controlled with big vents, that at night when it gets down to 50 or 45 degrees, the vents would open up, sweep all the heat out that's in the building trapped during the day. When in the morning, when it gets up to about 60, those vents would automatically close. So we'd had a natural cooling system. That was a big hurdle, keeping track of making sure that the customer's wine is kept where it needs to be. Meantime, the labeling machine was just running day and night. I had to get a second crew to run that.
Did you add more services beyond labeling?
No, not really. I didn't want to get involved with bottling there. Now that's a big thing in California. They have these big, huge trucks that go out with tanks, put the wine in the tanks and take them to a stationary. Castillo's, which was Bethel Heights Winery, their son,
John.
Yeah, he's got one down right over here, and he also had a mobile bottling. There was a lot of mobile bottling units that pull into a winery and they hook up to it, and when there's transferring wine from vats into hoses, through hoses into labeling and all that stuff, you can keep going, but you got to sort of say, okay, I'm good at what I'm doing. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Okay? If it's not broke, don't fix it.
What about staffing? Obviously, you were hired and probably kind of expected to be the person. So all of a sudden, you have a staff. Tell me about finding people to run.
The biggest first issue that I needed was an office person to operate this ongoing built inventory system on computer. We could feed the information into it. I hired a gal named Lana. She had worked in a title trust company in Walla Walla, Washington. When I went out advertised the interview for a person to do that. Evergreen Helicopters over here just had finished a project, and they let go about 100 and some employees. I was bombarded with 60 resumes for one position. I whittled it down to 6 well-qualified people, and one of them was even a supply officer in the Marine Corps. But anyway, Lana was, I liked her personality, I liked her smile. She was great with working with people, and she was sort of the bedrock of the focal point in the office. Then I needed to get the second personnel I needed was somebody to actually physically put the wine away, feed the information to Lana so they could put it into the computer. Of course, there's all kinds of federal paperwork and stuff that backs that up. So I hired a sort of a unique name for a monastery, Chuck Sinner. Chuck is now the manager of the Abbey Wine Warehouse. From my military background, one thing you always do, and I've always believed in this, whenever you're running any kind of a position, you want to train all your people around you, so if you go down and you're not available anymore, the business can go on and somebody can step in your shoes and keep the customers happy. Chuck did a great job. I trained him. He knew everything about the place, air conditioning, the trucking, how to help load the trucks. Drivers will pretty much tell you how to load their trucks. They know where it's got to go, their first drop, second, third, and fourth. So, but anyway, Chuck did a great job, just a fantastic job. They've had some other managers in there before him, but they finally realized that he had a lot of knowledge, and so they put him into the position. And then we had to come up with a compliance officer position. When you move wine, there's certain states that you cannot ship wine into unless it goes to a distributor first and that sort of thing. I'll give you a prime example of what can happen. Doug Tennell from Brickhouse Vineyards sent a shipment of wine to West Virginia. West Virginia is a reciprocal state. You can send it there. But it went to Virginia to a distribution center at FedEx, or I think it was UPS. They confiscated it because that part of Virginia was a non-compliance. And you're probably talking $1,200 worth of wine that he never got back. He would got on the phone and talked to him, "Where's my wine?" They would get run off to somebody else. Nobody ever knew what happened. He said they must have had some good dinners back there. But that's one of the major things. We had to have a compliance officer that could track what states we could send to and which one we couldn't. So it was it's a progress. You deal with the problems as they come along, and then you say, "Oh, how am I going to permanently fix this?" Well, that's how you do it.
You got to confiscate the good stuff, right? If you're on the other end of it.
That's right. It's all good, but some just a little bit better than others.
So you mentioned when the first expansion, you're looking at a new building. You take what you need, you triple it in size, you fill it up. Was there a cap in mind? Was there an ideal size or a size we can't go beyond in mind, or was it just kind of growing until it stopped?
It grew until it stopped. Later on, I could have expanded more. The monastery only had 87 monks, and they were getting down to a point that there was only like 42 left. And, they're self-sustaining. Everybody thinks the church is backing them. They had their own bookbindery. They had their own fruitcake, date nut cake bakery, which they market at Christmas time. They have, when they moved up, when the monks moved up from Pecos, New Mexico, they bought this farm out there. That's 1,500 acres, and it was a logged off piece of nothing. So the monks decided they would plant 10 acres of fir trees each year. It takes 60 years to grow a tree, and in 50 to 60 years they could harvest 10 acres of it off, replant, and it would be self-sustaining in the long run. And so that's how that. So they didn't really want to go beyond what we had built. And it was producing some income for them. And of course we were taxed. We have to pay a tax on that portion, just like they have to pay a tax on their bookbindery and their fruitcake business. So one of the stories was Brother Clarence was one of the monks that run the forestry. He got to such an age he couldn't run up and down the hills with a chainsaw anymore. He was 94. And so they brought in a professional forester, and I was sitting on the financial meeting with that, and they were saying, the forester turns to Brother Clarence, he says, "Where are your records of all the forestry that you've planted?" And Brother Clarence made the gesture. There was no records. He had it all here.
crazy.
It is. But they did not want to expand any more than that.
Sure.
So then John Niemeyer and Jeff come by to visit me, and I give them a complete tour of the place. And my attitude was, they're not going to build any more. We'll take care of what we got. They're going to need a winery. So John has always dealt with a lot of warehouses in Portland area. He bought the Mrs. Smith Pie Factory over here. And I can't remember what the square footage of that was, but that took off, and they filled that in no time. They have a couple hundred wineries in there now. They have an annex warehouse in Tualatin that's part of that. It's all called Oregon Wine Services. And since then, Jeff went into his own wine with Eminent Domain, which is a beautiful location. And there's been other wine warehouses. There was one in Salem called Northwest Distribution and Storage. And then there's another one now in Tualatin, and I don't remember the name of it. But, so it's slowly, warehouses from California moved up from Napa, figuring that they'd get a piece of the action. But Oregon Wine Services and the Abbey's pretty well. One of the things the wineries thought about the Abbey is they got this thought that we store our wine there. It's a nice, quiet place. My wine's in a quiet place. Okay.
Sacred and contemplative space, on that note, were there any other kind of unique challenges to having the monastery as the overarching kind of business under which this was running?
Just the mystique of it. It's a monastery and there's monks, and there was little side businesses that we did to help, I guess you'd say, enhance the business. In warehousing, one of your biggest things is pallets to put wine on. Pallets are about, used ones or rebuilt ones are about $8 a piece. New ones are 20. And Father Pascal give me one monk in the morning for 4 hours to help Chuck put wine away. In the afternoon, they have novices that come in to this monastery. It takes those novices 7 years to become a monk, to become married to the Trappist Abbey. So they'd send these up to me. Well, I'd buy lumber from the local lumber boat, and they had a pallet repair. It was free labor. They repaired our pallets, put them back out, and so that was our way of recycling, one of our ways of recycling. One of the other things I did develop that cropped up over the period of time, and I worked with a foam company over in Wilsonville. I helped design wine shipping containers. We started with foam, but then later on with some of the containers went totally cardboard because of environmental reasons. But we designed one that could be used as shipped as a 3-pack, 6-pack, 12 or 12-pack, and so wineries started purchasing a lot of those from us, and then of course later on wineries found out where we were having them made. They just get them direct, which is fine. You know, that just happens in business.
Sure. You talked earlier about kind of how the business grew basically by you'd find a challenge, you'd find something that needed to be done, and then figure out how to do it.
Yes.
Were there people in the industry asking things of you that either you did eventually add to the business or decided not to add?
There was one winery that wanted me to completely revamp my labeling machine just for his label. And I being electronics and a repair person, I designed it in such a way I could do that. I didn't like to because it took a lot of mechanical manipulating. But that was one of the things that there was always people having requests of some sort, and I just tell them that, you know, I'd have to tell them, no, I don't think we can do that at this time, but I'll look into it. And I'd look into it and see if it was feasible. And you know, you can just keep going on with no end to it.
So obviously you were there as the industry was exploding in growth. You had obviously more wineries and more wines all the time. What was your impression of the industry during that time of growth? What were the changes to it, and what were the kind of what were the kind of the biggest like sort of standout moments for you?
I think the biggest thing was they were expanding quite largely, and of course that's like it dropping in the top of a funnel. I was at the bottom of that, dealing with a tremendous amount of influx. inventory. That was one of the biggest challenges. And of course, then there's in winery business, in the wineries they keep what they call library wines. They'll get done with a particular vintage or a particular wine, and they'll keep 6 to 8 cases of that in a library somewhere. We become some of had to put in special racking and some things to be able to accommodate. The drawback to that is a winery will call you up a year later and they'll say, by the way, I need a 1.5 liter for a wedding coming up, and I know it's in my library. Well, we'd have to move 35 pallets to get to that library one. Well, I put in racking and made it a little easier. Those are the kind of challenges, but they wanted access to it. I had to come to a point that I'd tell them, you have to give me 4 hours notice at least, because we're doing our day-to-day business, and plus this is an addition to it. If that answers your question.
What about your impressions of the people who came into the industry and of the sort of the growth of the wines themselves?
Wonderful, wonderful people. I'll give you an example. I went on a trip down to south of Grants Pass, and there was a little winery there, and I went and talked to the man. He come out of the fields. He was pretty much a one-man show, and I introduced myself and talked with him, and he said, you know, you're all the way here from the monastery up in McMinnville area. He says, can the wife and I fix you lunch? So we sat down and had lunch and had wine with them, and you know, they're so friendly. They were just receptive to anything. Of course, it was pretty nice, you know, but overall, all the wineries are pretty good. Once in a while, with any kind of business, you're going to have a stinker or two, and it's just what it is. It just happens. But mostly, I'm going to say that 99.5% were excellent, excellent to work with, and you get like Doug Tennell, for instance, from Brick House. He come up with a different system. He would bottle his wine unlabeled and put it in baskets. He would bring it in, and then he would order his packaging that he wanted to put it in. As we were labeling it on the labeling line, we used that packaging. So it was a only handle at once situation. Smart thinking on his part, and we accommodated that. You know, all those kind of little things, and they appreciate it. To this day, he wouldn't go anywhere else, I don't believe. And a lot of them have become personal friends. I bailed out of the wine industry in 2004. I retired. And I was sitting at home. You know, I like to fish. I fished off the Oregon coast since 1965. Fished for halibut and one thing and another, and I did a little hunting. You know, I've been living in Oregon all my life. You know, it's here. And anyway, in that, I almost lost my train of thought here. In that period of time, oh gosh, it'll come to me. It fleeted out.
Well, you're talking about you retired in 2004.
Yeah, 2004 I retired, and they had a transportation manager at Oregon Wine Services. They call it Oregon Wine Transport is what they call that division. And there was a man named Pat Devine that a lumber company went under, and he'd been a transportation dispatcher. And so he called me up, and I initially, while I was still on the job, he went on a trip with me to make a delivery to Seattle, and I sort of, on that trip, I could clue him in on what was going on and how the wineries work and where contacts and so forth. And he called me up and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, really not too much. I'm doing some woodworking at home. I'm building some things, and I'm getting ready to go fishing. And how'd you like to go to work for Oregon Wine Transport?" And I said, "Well, sure. What do you got going?" "Well, I've got the big trucks and the big drivers," but he says, "I need somebody to run a Sprinter van and go out and pick up this 4 cases here, 10 here, or whatever, so I'm not moving a big truck and paying huge fuel for that." So he put me to work. And I've been there now, I think 3 or 4 years, and it's filled in pretty well. Prior to quitting, I did get involved in through John Niemeyer owned what is that winery right in Dundee, Northwest Wine Company. Northwest Wine Company, or Laurent owns it. They had some grocery stores that they top end, like Four Seasons, that was in Seattle area, and some of the surrounding Tacoma, all those outlying areas. And so they wanted somebody to take a box truck up there, so I got involved in that. And that was carry a logbook, go just like a regular driver. And that was a little bit of a challenge. But because you have to leave here at 3 in the morning, make your first drop at Tacoma at 7 o'clock, and there's always a surround back with other trucks lined up to unload their produce for the day or whatever they're delivering. So that was quite a challenge. I didn't have any problem operating the equipment because I operated some of the most large equipment you could ever think of. I've hauled tanks and all kinds of stuff. So, cases of pallets of wine, you just got to know how to strap them down so nothing gets moved. But I did get involved with that for a while. And to this day, I don't know how much longer I'll drive for him. I'm 82, and I'm still in pretty good shape. So. Anyway.
As long as you feel like it, right?
Oh, yeah.
You talked earlier about one of the jobs you had, one of the parts of your job was to go out and, you said, meet people, like you said, going around meeting people. As the industry grew, did you find that hard to keep up with where people were and the new projects that were starting?
Yeah, it was, because there was a lot of new people coming into the system. The family of Oregon wineries started getting additions out here, and some of those people didn't understand that the people that had been there for years and years and years were working with each other. And so going out, cold turkey and meeting some of these people, and it's like, who are you, and made it a little difficult. But once they start talking a little bit to the other wineries and they knew our reputation at the Abbey, it was not a problem. I'm from the Abbey, and you could invite them out for a tour. We had an open house each fall. Usually had some coffee, and monastery was good about bringing a little music, and we'd have tea and coffee for them and give them tours and stuff, just to be part of the industry.
So, are there notable changes that you've seen in Oregon wine in your years?
Yes.
What are the biggest ones?
Going to stationary bottling with the big tank trucks. That's one of the major things. Everybody did everything themselves in their own little winery, and ordering just bottle glass, for instance. That's a major thing. For a while, there was some glass that came in from Mexico, and it was good glass, but in the train getting here, they didn't put any dividers between it, and the glass would rub, so it had dust. Then we had some Chinese glass came in from China, and it was so thin that on a labeling line, when you clamped it with a labeling machine, the whole side of a bottle would bust out. Well, it takes time to clean that up, and plus the labels get stained and so forth. But that was one of the maybe. But mainly the going to the, like they do in California, the big boys, like Kendall Jackson and all those people that produce 150,000 cases of one wine. Yeah. The startup of Walla Walla and Columbia Valley up the river, through
the gorge.
Yeah, the gorge, Dallas. There's a lot of wines there that are like Merlots and Cabernets and stuff. They love that heat, and so that's produced some really nice wines. Here, where it's cooler, the Pinot Noir is a big thing. And then there's some Syrahs and all that other types of wine. I had to learn all that stuff too.
I was curious about that. How did you kind of find yourself learning about wine?
Primarily just talking to the people in tasting rooms and meeting them, and well, why don't you take a bottle of this home and see what your wife thinks about it, And then of course I was pretty close to what they call the cellar rats. The cellar rats are the ones that work for the winemaker, and you get to know them, and they'll give you all kinds of, well, they're in a sort of an enclosed operation, you know, and they're just happy to give you information. There's unfiltered wine, there's filtered, that goes on and on and on. And,
so you mentioned you're still involved in the industry. You're still driving some wine around.
oh yeah, I go pick it up.
What go ahead.
Give you an example. A winery starting out sometimes will only get, there's a distributor back east called Small Lots. They might only order 6 cases. So I got to get that 6 cases plus maybe this winery over here has got 10 cases for Small Lots. So you got to put all that together. So you go pick it up with and take it over to the warehouse and unload it, and the boys put it together there. And then of course it's got to be marked with the PO number or anything. You try to do anything in the world that nothing gets lost. And when you're talking about a truck with 45 different kinds of orders on it, and they're stacked and so forth, you know, the drivers know where to drop it and stuff. But then it's always being handled. You just keep your fingers crossed. But you do your part to start with. Yeah.
So what's your impression of the Oregon wine industry right now, and what do you kind of see maybe coming next for it?
Growth to some degree, especially I keep up on pretty much the social media and things that are going on. There's a tremendous problem going on in France right now with drought, and England's coming forward with their wines, and we'll be okay here for a while. As the climate warms, I would expect more Merlots, more Cabs, more Syrahs, more wines, grapes that can grow, that can stand the heat. And Pinot Noir likes to be cool, so I don't know, that might be a change eventually. There'll always be somebody that be raising it close to the coast where it's cool. Some of the marketing in this is a deal too. So there was a man, Dick Cutler, Flying Dutchman Winery, down by Otter Rock. And Dick and I, we stored for him, and he bottled down there. He was going to build a winery down there, but he has a little tiny winery. And his wine was, how did he say that? It was ocean. I'm not going to get this quite right. It was ocean breeze cured, or something like that. You know, because of the coolness, but everybody's got a little gimmick, you know, of some sort. Yeah.
So what comes next for you? You mentioned you're driving for at least a little bit longer. What else are you looking ahead to?
Oh, actually, I don't know. Just, you know, as you get older, there's always some kind of struggles that come into your health-wise in your system, you know. So I haven't got anything major, but that might become a point that maybe you start getting glaucoma or something and you can't drive anymore. I'll probably just do my woodworking here, and just, I've got a boat in the shop that I'm working on right now. It'll be good for lake fishing and crabbing and that sort of thing. I run a 22-foot boat off the Oregon coast. Like I say, since 1965, I had several different ones. And that's always been a hobby, fishing. Just give you a little side note on that one. I was my fishing partner moved up to a place called Birkenfeld. It's up in the mountains above Vernonia. Okay. And so he doesn't come down much anymore to fish with me. So we were fishing off the Oregon coast 3 years ago, just before the pandemic, and we were running electric downriggers to try to pick up a Chinook. Chinook are always on the bottom, silvers are on the top feeding, coho. And I hooked a big fish, and he said, "Man, you got a big one on." Well, it ended up being a 41-pound halibut. So I love the surprises in the ocean. A pilot whale that comes up and looks at you, all that kind of stuff. So maybe I'll experience that. I can always charter out. And the biggest hoot is going tuna fishing.
Why is that?
You're trolling along at 15 miles an hour, and they go by you doing about 40. And when they hook onto that line, you don't put your thumb on that reel because you'll burn yourself. Fast fish. Yeah. That's just personal stuff that's been a lot of fun over the years. But I've built grandfather clocks. I haven't built any pianos or anything, but I do cabinetry work. When I worked at Beaver Coaches, I started out doing electronics, and I ended up in their cabinet division, which was wonderful because I could learn gluing techniques and all kinds of neat stuff. So, yeah.
Handy skills to have.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Look good on my resume. Yesterday, we acquired a house over in Woodburn, and the people had the heater removed out of it. And one come up for sale out here of a house they're going to destroy, and I went out and removed the heater out of it myself. And the guy asked me, he says, "You only sold it to me for $100. He just had a new motor put in it and stuff." He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I tell you, it's going to look good on my resume. Now I'm a furnace remover and installer." So you always get involved. I've always been one that just comes up with all kinds of stuff to get involved with.
You got to fill the sheet, right?
That's right. That's right.
You mentioned the pandemic, and I know that you're not directly involved anymore, but I'm curious about, did you have any perception of how that affected sort of the wine storage and distribution business?
Oh yeah, it did. It affected it in marketing. It affected a lot of ways because of the trucking. Mm-hmm. And of course now, because of the economy that's doing what it's saying, that's affecting it now. Mm-hmm. But before with the pandemic, yes. Yeah. We had a lot of wine stored there for a while. I mean, when you're talking about just one little monastery out here that's got 350, 400,000 cases, and then you take somebody like Oregon Wine Service's Chef Meter's old business, you know, they're probably looking at, oh gosh, 12,000, 30,000, 40,000 for, 100 wineries. Keeping track of all that and stuff. Some of that slowed down, wasn't moving quite as quick. And I imagine that there's a trickle down. Now it's starting to open up again. We still ship some. Always was shipping some. I've always found it didn't matter whether our economy's one way or another, people like alcohol. They'll always, that's a nice crutch for some people.
They'll always find a way to get it.
Yeah.
Obviously, you also brought up the supply chain and the last couple of years of that. So what are the effects you've seen of that on those businesses? Are people struggling to get wines where they need to get them in the time they need to get them?
Not near as much anymore because, with all the big warehouses here and the trucking that's in place, and you get a good transportation manager like Pat Devine. He's just unlimited the things he can do and help people out. Mm-hmm. He's the nuts and bolts guy that a winery comes out, "Hey, I got a distributor back and such and such. Can you get my wine there?" He wants me to make the arrangements to get it there. Pat will figure it out. He's been doing it for so long that so it's a great asset is to fill in those gaps that happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I deal with a lot of small distributors in Portland too with the Sprinter van. They'll get wine that comes in from South America, Africa, all over. It comes in there, and I'll have to go pick up. They want 100 cases moved to California, so I'll have to go pick it up with a Sprinter van and put it into the warehouse, and we go through all the bill of ladings and all the stuff to move it. One thing about a bill of lading, that's a legal document to move one item to another place legally. And you got to have the gallonage on it and all kinds of little stipulations. Good transportation guy is hard to beat. Yeah.
Oh, the things you never thought you'd have to know, right?
That's exactly right.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you, Jerry. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that you wanted to cover?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I hope that there's a few people that come to my mind that you might want to treat, if you haven't already seeked them out. A retired winemaker and a wonderful person is Redford.
Myron?
Myron
Oh,
Redford.
yeah.
We go back together. Michael and David Adelsheim. Fantastic people. They were one of the first people that stored with us at the Abbey. In fact, they even set up in the corner somewhere and done their own labeling there too. So, some wonderful people. And they've been in the industry for years, and they just stand out. I mean, it's just top notch. Yamhill Valley Vineyards out here is another one.
Dennis and Elaine.
I guess the biggest thing that I really I really stands out is the fact of how many Latinos and vineyard workers and all the people that gather an income from the wine industry. And Adelsheim and Susan Blosser and those old people set up medical systems for them, so they had some kind of medical support, which is a wonderful thing, you know. So there's a big picture here that a lot of things that went on, but they could not harvest these grapes or do the things they do if they didn't have that the Hispanic, or I'd rather use the word Latino. My partner's not only Latino, she's Thule Indian and also French. Her last name's Lamont. So she's made me aware of you know, and I've met a lot of really neat people from Mexico that's been here for years, and they just couldn't function without them. Good crews that go out, you know, they're out there in January, February trimming the grapes, you know, and then they come on and then trim them, get them ready for when, and then pick them later. You know, that's all got to be done right. You know, and it got to be handled right. So that's one of the biggest standout of all the employees that they employ in this industry. And now with all the UC Davis and Linfield, and I've been to the annex down there right out west of Salem a little bit.
Chemeketa?
Yeah, Chemeketa. You know, that's all wonderful things to me, because it's all part of the growth. Yeah. Wine will be around a long time. It's only been around for 3,000 years.
Got a long ways to go.
Yeah, yeah. Even the monks like their wine.
That's where they all came from. They all came from the monks.
That's right.
So it's perfectly fitting.
I used to get their what do they call it when they do communion? I used to get their wine ship their wine from California up here, and they buy it by the gallon jug. And I get a shipment in for them, and I store that in the warehouse for them. And so, you know, it's there.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry. We appreciate your time and your hospitality today, sharing all your stories with us.
Oh, you didn't get any cooking? We gotta.
We'll go there next.
Okay.
Thank you so much. We'll let you off the hook.
You're more than welcome, and if there's anything later on, I can probably send you an email.
Sure.
There's a lot of people I know in the industry that I haven't mentioned today that are just wonderful people. And if you haven't already contacted them, they'll get you a lot of history.
For sure.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it. That's great. Thank you so much.
You bet. You're more than welcome.